Good evening, everybody. My name is Eddy, and I'm with Deacon Fisheries. So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to Mr. Fruge and the whole team here at Fruge. It's really been a pleasure to do business with you guys. And meeting Mr. Fruge, it seems like we really have a lot in common. We've been doing business for a number of years, but we first met in Boston this past year. The more we learn about you guys, it's amazing the similarities and how our companies came about. Also, I just want to say that it's really been exciting to me the opportunity to meet some of the consumers here. On the supply side of things, in particular grouper and snapper, I get to see the suppliers and fishermen and the producers all the time, but we don't get to see so many consumers and end users and chefs like this very often. So we want to just thank you for the opportunity to be a part of it tonight. So Deacon Fisheries, we were founded in 1995 by my father, Eddy, and he's, if I'm mentioning like who we are, I have to mention him. So he's an incredibly diligent and hardworking guy. I've admired him my whole life, and he likes to keep things simple, old-fashioned service. The phone gets answered quickly. We are in the office early. We are honest and straightforward in how we do business. So just like when you started your farm, you probably didn't expect to be doing so many different species years later. So we didn't expect to be the grouper experts 17 years after our founding. But that's who we are, along with a lot of other things. So our goal every day is that you don't have to feel like this. And next slide, please. And that you do feel like that. So with that, I want to introduce my colleague, Adam Hansen. He's the account manager that deals with you guys. These are my two kids, by the way. And so literally his goal every day is he talks to you guys that you get what you need and have a pleasant experience doing that. And that's our complete goal of being here. And in the meantime, there are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes to make that happen. So I'm going to stick mainly to grouper tonight and a little bit of snapper, but it's kind of like your business. You're a logistics company in a lot of aspects. You can't do your seafood well without being a good logistics company. So if you could bring us, please. I love maps, and all of our products come from the ocean. So here we see the ocean. In particular, the grouper and snapper obviously come from the shallower areas. So if you look at like the turquoise water here, in particular, if you see the state of Florida, you'll see to the west of Florida there a large bank. So most of that water is most of that water is less than a couple hundred feet deep. So you'll see right there. And then also to the north of the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico here, you'll see a large bank. And to the south of Texas and Louisiana. That's grouper and snapper habitat. So that's where a grouper and snapper comes from. Also, a lot of it comes from, you'll see here off of Nicaragua and Honduras, a large bank off of the Pacific here, another large bank, and there are other areas such as Brazil and even up in the Carolinas to a small extent, where we source our fish. Here's a little more specific view of the Caribbean. We get a lot of products that we'll mention in a minute here from this area. And the next one, please. And the vast majority of our grouper comes right here from the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of it actually comes from the Mexican side of this water here. We deal with a lot of boats down there that we are partnered with. It is the same grouper that we have from the boats off of Louisiana and Texas. So it's 12 grouper as well. And next, please. And there's like 3 more. There we go. Again, please, 2 more. That's all right. Should design it different. So our biggest challenge Our biggest challenge is that we have wild supply fluctuations every day. Have you ever been fishing before? I prefer catching than fishing, but how many of you caught exactly what you expected to fish or what you expected to catch that day? Not too many hands. So every day our boats go out in the ocean and they take bait and they do everything they can to catch what they want to catch. But at the end, they end up bringing something oftentimes very different to port. And so every time they get in, we've had some days where we will unload almost 100,000 pounds of grouper between the different boats we deal with in a period of a day or two. Then there are other times where we can't produce enough grouper if our lives depended on it. So in the meantime, the restaurants have a relatively consistent demand. You guys still need your 5 pounds every night, or your 10 pounds, or you're on a complete different spectrum than we are. And 3 more once again. So what's the solution? One more, please. The solution is knowledge, communication, and flexibility. Knowledge, that's why we're here tonight. The more you can know about the product, and the more I can know about it, the better we can be at it, the more that we will be able to understand what's taking place, and we'll be able to get what we need. Communication, that's where Adam comes in. We need to communicate all the time, and it's very important to us that we meet your needs. And if we can't, it's very important that we communicate that. So it doesn't happen too often, but occasionally, if you guys are asking for something and we can't deliver it, we want to let you know ahead of time. So that's why in a moment here we'll have a seasonality map too, so you guys can know when it's best to put, for example, grouper on a special, when you can expect to have it in abundance, and when you might just stay away from it because it's going to be a little more scarce. Flexibility. This is one thing that, since I have this audience, it's really cool to be able to mention. As I did mention earlier, some days we literally have grouper coming out of our ears, and other days we don't have enough. So through communication and flexibility, it's great for us to be able to communicate and say, hey, listen, next week, if you want to put grouper on special, like, you would be our heroes, because we know we have a dozen boats coming into port. We've been talking to the captains, and there's a lot of fish on board, and the prices will be good. This is the time to go with grouper, or perhaps snapper or something else. But that's going to require flexibility, and so the restaurant industry isn't always super flexible. We know that you can't always be, but printing menus frequently, being able to have different dishes that can go on and off the menu, and having a list of specials, those are all ways that we like to encourage flexibility. Next one, please. The black grouper family. To get down to the nitty-gritty of the various groupers here, we have, I believe, over there, the black grouper, and its close cousin, the gag grouper, will be the next one. And then we have 2 more, scamps and firebacks. There we go. All right, black grouper. In Florida, some people call them carburetas. These tend to get pretty large. We will occasionally see them up to about 100 pounds, or even a little bit above that. But the common size lately has been running about 30 pounds. I believe when you guys buy them, you tend to look for about a 10 to 20 pound fish. These tend to be the highest price item, but they also yield great. They yield almost 50% if you cut them carefully. Gags are also pretty abundant right now. Scamps and firebacks are more of a specialty item. We don't see them quite as consistently, but when we're catching blacks and gags, you always end up finding a few scamps and firebacks. So we try to kind of collect those, and when somebody wants something unique to put on a menu, those are great items. Each grouper has its own flavor profile. So if you ask a dozen people, you probably get a dozen different answers. Several people in our office prefer the scamps. They say they're the best tasting grouper. To me, I can't taste the difference. But so that's the black grouper family. Our largest seller on whole grouper would be the black grouper and the gag. And then the next page here is the red grouper family. Well, it's all the same family, but the red grouper is probably, it and the black grouper are the largest producers that we have on our boats. The red grouper we frequently use to cut pre-cut fillets. So that's kind of a value item that works well for us. We'll actually cut fillets at a couple of our plants there in Mexico, on the Yucatan Peninsula, and we air freight them up here, and becomes a supply chain. We can get it to you guys quickly. So the red grouper also we get whole. We have some of our boats that fish in deeper water that tend to get very large red grouper. So you guys frequently order like a 10-pound and up red grouper, and that's kind of a prize red grouper that is very large. So we pride ourselves on being able to get that. Yellow edge is a great grouper. It has a very white meat. It tends to have a little bit of a more flaky texture. It's more seasonal though also, and it's kind of very deep water. The yellow edge is typically caught in about 600 feet of water to even over 1,000, whereas most of the other groupers are caught in more like even as shallow as maybe 20, 30 feet up to a couple hundred. The snowies, those are a little more of a bycatch, you see too many of them. And the strawberries are a smaller grouper, but they're very pretty whole. This picture doesn't do it much justice, but they're oftentimes like strawberry red and very vibrant appearance. So they're great for like a display case type fish. So that's the main families of grouper. And then on the next slide here, we have our calendar. You'll see that most of it is yellow. So we have kind of like a stoplight here, red, yellow, and green. So red are months where it's very difficult to source grouper. Now I'm pleased to say that for some of our most key accounts like you guys, we generally are able to maintain some supply of grouper year-round with all the different boats that we deal with in different parts of the world. But especially in these times where it's red, there needs to be additional flexibility because there aren't all of the species available. So sometimes, like for example, we don't do much with Pacific grouper, but we do always have Pacific grouper in this time when our typical Atlantic species are unavailable. So it's very important to us. Our business is built on being consistent. Our last name is Eddy, Jonathan Eddy. My dad's name is Eddy. We like to be steady Eddy there every day, so you can rely on us. The seasonality is something that is, sometimes we feel like a weather forecaster. I mean, every day you just never know what hand of cards you're going to get dealt. So you never know what the boats are going to bring. So we do our very best to be smart and to be watching the markets and to know what to anticipate. In general, we do a pretty good job of anticipating with I guess about a week or two, even a month out. We can generally tell you if we expect things to be good or bad, heavy or light on production. So this is a rough estimate. And for example, a lot of falls, a lot of the end of the year, a lot of times we actually do see decent grouper production, but there are a lot of competing species that fishermen tend to go to. So for example, right now in the Yucatan Peninsula, most of our fleet there is actually fishing for octopus, and they're catching 5 times as much octopus as they would catch grouper. So ironically, the grouper are eating the octopus too. It's one of their favorite foods. So due to our guys fishing octopus, groupers gone up in price and supplies going down. So that might be more detail in what we know about grouper, but we can move on here to red snapper. We have about 10 different snappers I wanted to mention. Snappers, it's something that we have every day, but it's much more of a, it's just a lot harder to predict. Every species seems to have a lot of anomalies. It's very tough to predict one day from another what will happen. In general, the genuine American red is the world's preferred snapper. Everybody wants that. That's it sets the standard. I think part of that is just because it's caught here locally, we're used to seeing it. It has a beautiful white fillet, and the skin sometimes tends to be a little more pink, and then sometimes it's a vibrant red, depending on the season and the diet of the fish. We have the beeline here, also called vermilion. That picture doesn't do it justice. Those little yellow lines you see tend to be, when the fish is nice and fresh, almost like a silver stripe. And it's much more red, just a very bright red when it's good and fresh. The blackfin snapper is unique. It actually looks almost identical to the genuine American red. However, you have that little black fin, and this tends to trade at about 25 to 35% lower prices than the American red. There's not a lot of it out there, but when we get it, it's something that some of our customers really like because it's just a nice kind of value red snapper there. The yellow-eye snapper, also, the fillet, it's very hard to tell the difference from the genuine American red, and from the outside appearance, some people think it's even more beautiful than the genuine American red. The real only difference is that yellow eye. But that's a great alternative if you want to save. Again, probably you're talking 15 to 20% savings, and oftentimes greater availability. We market it as a yellow eye red snapper. One thing we've been really promoting lately is the queen snapper. This is we've got a few boats that are fishing for this on a very regular basis out of Honduras, and they've been doing very well with it. It's a gorgeous fish. One of the drawbacks is the shape of the fillet. It's a very elongated fillet, so that makes it a little tricky for portioning. However, it's the preferred snapper in Hawaii. It's called a naga in Hawaii. It's the same fish. It's also called longtail, ruby. Some people even call them ball bats due to the long shapes, like a baseball bat, I suppose. It has a very large eye. When it's a nice fresh fish and has a clear eye, it's very attractive to have in a display case. If you get like a 10-pounder and put it in a display in front of your restaurant, it looks very attractive there. So those are the main red snappers that we have available on a consistent basis. And then there's on the next page, we will see several other snappers that aren't red. We have the yellowtail snapper, the Pacific lane, the mangrove, the mutton snapper, and the hogfish. The yellowtail snapper is something that is also one of our largest sellers. We do a lot with that. We deal with some boats in the Florida Keys that fish it. Also, our boats in Honduras and in Mexico fish this snapper all the time. Like the other snappers, it's a little hit or miss. We'll have a bunch of it one week and not so much the next, but we generally maintain a pretty good stock of yellowtails, and Pacific lanes are the same way. This photo of the yellowtail is more how it looks underwater. Once it's out of the water, oftentimes if it's good and fresh, it almost looks pink like an American red snapper, just having the yellow or sometimes more of a greenish line and tail. The Pacific lane also is very fresh, sometimes has a very nice pink hue to it. The muttons and mangroves are more of a value snapper, probably because the skin isn't as red, but it still has a good meat. Especially the mangrove is a local delicacy in Florida. And right up there with the American red snapper is the hogfish. Everybody loves hogfish. It's my dad's favorite snapper. It's one of my favorites also. The one problem with it is we just cannot get enough of it most of the time, especially on the larger ones. So now if we can move on to the calendar. I wanted to provide you guys with the viewpoint of the availability of snapper. As you can see, it's kind of a crapshoot here most of the year. It's all yellow. Like, we'll have it, but it's one of those things that's a little difficult for us to guarantee on any particular day. So that's why we value so much communication. If you guys can let us know what you're looking to do, then we can tell you again next week we're looking good for that. But it's hard to say several months in advance exactly how we're going to be doing. So once again, that's why communication becomes such a focus for us at Fisheries. It is easy to predict, though, the months that we will not have certain items. Hogfish, our fishermen just don't fish it in those months. Muttons, the same thing. You see those times where we're bleeding. Next, please. Sustainability. That's a big catchword that everybody is talking about these days. It's something that's been very important to us at Beacon Fisheries, but we also are dealing with several of the main species we deal with grouper and snapper are in our areas where it's very difficult to label it or certify it sustainable. For example, to speak briefly about how these fish are captured, our grouper are caught by hand lines. We actually have thousands of small boats, and we have a large part of our supply chain is supplying that boats with bait and consistently going to these remote beaches in the Yucatan and in Mexico to pick up the fish that little day boats will catch by hand. And the freshness of that fish, if done properly, is really outstanding. But in that hook and line, the capture method is very safe. You're not getting bycatch, you catch what you're wanting. But also, it's hard to certify as sustainable. It's hard to go to a big certifying body like MFC or like the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They're going to want to come and see like one group of boats fishing for one product. And so it's really hard to do that in the Yucatan where we have the little our same, you've got those guys that are fishing in small little boats. We also have large long liners, and then we have boats in Florida that are fishing for it, boats in Nicaragua and Honduras, and so it's kind of it's spread out enough, and the capture methods are different enough. Also, we have divers that, especially in Mexico, we get a lot of black grouper that's caught by divers. So due to those differences, it's tough to get an official certification saying that we are sustainable. But what we do want everybody to know is that we at Beacon Fisheries are working very hard not only to only purchase sustainable fish, but to be an impetus to promote sustainability in all of the areas where we do business. Our kind of the 4 partners that we have in Mexico, one of them has just probably the nicest seafood plant I've ever walked into. He was the Minister of Fisheries many years ago in the Yucatan, and along with the help of my father and some other people, was actually able to initiate the first grouper closure in the Gulf of Mexico for the Mexican fishing fleet. And that's something that has been very valuable in protecting the fleet down there. And we're working right now with the Mexican government on promoting a couple of other things like size limits and a little larger grouper closure, a longer grouper closure to help ensure that we're sustainable there. So you probably won't see a big stamp saying certified sustainable in the near future on this, but we want you to feel confident that you're purchasing a fish that is sustainable, and that everything we're doing, we want to be purchasing this same fish 20 years from now, and we want there to be more of it and not less of it. That's about it. I really want to leave a few minutes if you guys did have any questions. I know I covered a lot of ground. Also, along with Mr. Fruge's company, we feel like a global logistics hopefully expert. Every day we are negotiating, haggling, fighting with airlines, and we have employees overseas that do nothing more than just quality control and logistics. And so there's so many different facets of getting the fish to market. And if you have any